It's a little bit quieter.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much for this invitation. We appreciate the chance to speak to y'all. I'm Ann Litrel. I'm an artist and writer, and my co-author is the very well-known Charles Seabrook with the Atlanta AJC, who's been writing with them for 40 years. So this project has been 8 years in the making. We are here to talk about 35 natural wonders of Georgia to see before you die. So just wanted to tell a little bit of the story of how it got started. In 2017, I was getting certified as a master naturalist at the Chattahoochee Nature Center, and I had lived in Georgia 30 years, but somehow I had not realized what an amazing state that we live in. In that master naturalist class, we learned all about the geology, the biology, the botany, incredible diversity of Georgia. And of course, Georgia extends all the way from sea level at the coast all the way up into the mountains, quite high. So you have a lot of different ecoregions. Anyway, I'm an artist. I've been painting all my life, but I had this idea. I said, oh, I should paint all the most beautiful places in Georgia. And I got this, I had a very bad idea, which was I got on the internet. I think I typed in something like Georgia Natural Wonders. Anyway, first page, many listings, but up popped this very interesting list called 35 Natural Wonders in Georgia to See Before You Die. It was by Charles Seabrook, and I had never seen this before. It was from 2008, and I was seeing this in 2017, so this list was floating around a while. Great list. I looked down the 35 places, some places I hadn't heard of before. I'm like, wow, what a great list. 35, let's see. If I do 1 or 2 a month, I'll be done in 2 to 3 years. This is called aspirational math. Anyway, began visiting these places, and it was pretty apparent quite quickly that each of these places you could do a lifetime of painting. They are all stunning and beautiful. I got into the project 2 or 3 years. I had emailed Mr. Seabrook just to say, hey, I'm an artist, I'm working on your list. After about 5 years into the project, I was just overwhelmed with everything, all these beautiful places. And I said, you know, it really needs to be a book. And so I emailed Charlie and said, hey, can I take you to lunch? And we met, and I said, I got this idea. I really think your list needs to be a book, and you need to write it. And Charlie said, well, I've been working on something else for a while, but you've convinced me. And that's when I knew Charlie is crazy. Anyway, that's how the book got started. I'll let Charlie tell his side, and then after that, we'll talk a little bit about some of these places.
It didn't happen like that. I met her in a bar in Millie Coochie, Georgia. That's our next book. Really, as Ann said, I've been writing the Wild Georgia column for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution since 1994, actually, and it's a weekly column and has ran almost every week since that time. But and I usually reserve every Monday to write my column. And I usually have a kind of a vague idea, at least a vague idea, if I don't actually know exactly what I might write about. But on this day in late January of 2008, I woke up and walked down to my little hallway to my little home office, and I'm sitting there early in the morning, and I'm saying, you know, what am I going to write about today? And, you know, it's a writer's block. Get a little scared because, you know, the words wouldn't come to me. I mean, that doesn't always happen, thank goodness, but on this day it did. So I started looking at the bookshelf next to my desk and just looking at something for inspiration. And there was this book, and I'm sure some of you have seen it before, called 1001 Places to See Before You Die. It came out, I think, in 2001. And I picked it up and I looked through it and I says, this might be a good idea. About that time, there was just all kind of stories coming out with music, 1,000 pieces of music you should listen to before you die, 1,000 movies to see before you die, 1,000 dishes to taste before you die. So I said, I've been thinking about doing something like this for a while, so why don't I do it for this? So anyway, it gave me the idea. I got to work on it and worked on it for the rest of the day, drawing up a list, taking away from it all the places I've been and looked at and admired over the years. And at the end of the day, and I called a few people who I knew might be able to help me out, or at least run it by them. And at the end of the day, I had 35. Now, why 35? Well, that's all the space I had in my column. That's all the space I had for 400 words. And so I wrote it, and I said, well, this will get me tied over until next week till I can come up with a much more substantial idea. But as those things happen, this turned out to be one of the best read columns I'd ever written, because people still, to this day, come up to me and said, this is my bucket list. I have it pasted on my refrigerator door. And of course, that does a little bit to your ego, but then, like Ann said, about 8-9 years later, I get an email from Ann. I didn't know Ann at the time. And she said her idea and that what she was doing, not only was she going around visiting these places, and a lot of them for the first time, and she was painting every one of them. Of course, my ego goes even higher. So we met, and of course, Ann, it's the rest of the story, is when we got together, and this is the result. And thank you.
One of the nice surprises when we wrote the book, when I was working with Charlie, was I did expect him to write about the geology, the natural history, things like that. But one of the neat things he also included was quite a bit of Georgia history, and also how are these places preserved? Because many of these places are tied almost to one specific person who really campaigned to get these places preserved. And he tells those stories. So although this is a book that started with natural history, it ended up including a lot of Georgia history. So we are going to share a little tidbit of history from 3 or 4 different places. This is the map of the 35 natural wonders, and you can see the color coding of the map. It is 5 physiogeographic regions. The green is the coastal plain. That's all that flat stuff we drive through. And of course, that used to be, in warmer times, covered with a great inland sea. So there's often sea fossils and things like that way inland. The pink region is where we are, the Piedmont. And of course, that fall line at the bottom of the pink is where the Piedmont descends down to the coastal plain. And a lot of our mill towns, of course, y'all are history people, you know that our mill towns were placed there, Macon and Augusta and Columbus and all of that. Then up in the orange in the northeast corner, of course, is our Blue Ridge Mountains. And then the gold region is ridge and valley. And a lot of the mountains there are these very long mountains or ridges, like Lookout Mountain, Pigeon Mountain, places like that. And then way in the northwest corner in the blue is a little corner of the Appalachian Plateau. So we have 5 physiogeographic regions, which really gives you an immense variety of ecosystems. So that's partly why Georgia is just so amazing. So Charlie's going to talk a little bit about our first site. It's Raven Bald in the Blue Ridge Mountain region. And of course, there's a big connection to our colonial history back when the naturalists were exploring Georgia, such as John James Audubon, Catesby, and of course William Bartram, who carved a path through there. So he's going to talk a little bit about that connection to history of Raven Bald.
Well, thank you. I'm as much a fan of historic preservation as I am of natural preservation. And of course, one of my teachers or mentors is sitting here with us, Ken Thomas. So if I make any mistakes, Ken, please correct me, Mr. Mentor. But anyway, Raven Bald, as probably a lot of you know, is Georgia's second highest peak. It misses being the highest by 88 feet, which is, of course, the highest of Brasstown Bald. And I guess that's what, about the length of this room, 88 feet. Anyway, Raven Bald, though, there's nothing second class about Raven Bald. I find it, no offense to Brasstown Bald, because I love Brasstown Bald also, but I find Raven Bald to be, how would you say, even more beautiful or whatever than Brasstown Bald. First of all, Raven Bald is undeveloped, but it's a botanical wonder, full of rare endangered species. Some of them are found nowhere else in the world. Matter of fact, there's one particular species of moth, the feathered moss, which is named after Raven Bald now, Raven Bald feathered moss, and was first found at Raven Bald and nowhere else is found. So it's a historical, it's beautiful as well as being historical. I'll tell you one historical story or a history story. William Bartram, as Ann said, first explored the Raven Bald area. Not the first one, of course, but he was the first to record and write about it. But anyway, the trail that leads to the top of Raven Bald is roughly what William Bartram followed up to the top. One particular story is that Bartram came across a beautiful flowering tree. It's all kind of white flowers. And it was a species of magnolia. And matter of fact, there's a little dispute on this, but one of the stories is that he named Raven Bald first Mount Magnolia, and which is now Raven Bald. There's a dispute about that, exactly which mountain he called Raven Bald, but I found most of the stories said Raven Bald. Anyway, he comes across this beautiful tree, white flowering tree in the area, and he wrote about it and even tried to record, send specimens, I think, to England. But he didn't write an official version of it in the botanical powers that be there in England at the time. He was going to wait until later. Well, what happened was another botanist a few years later named Fraser from England comes along and finds the same tree himself, and he writes it in a journal or whatever, officially records it. So now we know it as the Fraser Magnolia. And even though it was discovered by Bartram, we know it as the Fraser Magnolia. Beautiful tree, but there's other history there, an old school that was on Raven Bald, and there's legends of fire-eating monsters there on Raven Bald. But like I said, at the same time, it's a botanical treasure for Georgia. And it's probably, in a lot of people's mind, and mine too, has probably the best view in Georgia, even better than atop Raven Bald. You can see on a clear day, supposedly as far as 100 miles. But anyway, Ann will tell you more about the art, how she was impressed by it and from an artist standpoint.
So as Charlie says, when you climb Ravenbald, you truly feel like you're in the wilderness. It's not like when you go to the top of Brasstown Bald and there's a big visitor center. When you climb up and you are following the footsteps of William Bartram in this painting, I notice you can't see it too well out on the angles, but this is on the ascent. You are climbing up through the light. It was an early November morning, and you are going through a tunnel of rhododendrons, so it's shady on the top, and then the light is coming through. So this is a picture of the ascent. And then when you get to the top, you are perched on the edge of the Eastern Continental Divide, and you can see 360 degrees around you, and all the waters to your east and to the south, all the rivers there are running down into the Atlantic, joining other rivers and joining the Atlantic. And then if you look to your north and to the west, all the rivers you see there are all running down into the Tennessee River Valley, and then of course into the Mississippi and into the Gulf. So you are on this, like the top, the peak of the Eastern continental US, and that's where the waters are splitting away from you. The view is incredible. Up there at the top, this particular painting, I did paintings of 3 different kinds of trees for Ravenbald, and this particular one is one of the stunted red oaks that's at the top of the bald. There's not a lot of trees. It's a bald. There's a lot of heath and blueberries. There was a riot of blueberries. That's the red leaves and many flowers there. And then these stunted red oaks from the cold winds up there. And so I painted this tree a little bit. He almost seemed like a ghost to me. So there you can see his limbs are kind of twisted and fading away. That was very much the way I felt at the top about those trees. This is the old fire tower there. You can climb it, and that's where you can get your incredible 360-degree view. Ravenbald is truly beautiful, and when you're there and you think, I'm in the footsteps of William Bartram, it's just kind of inspiring. And then on the way down, this was November, I was walking through a golden, it was like a cathedral. The hickory leaves were all gold, the sun was coming down, the trees were like columns. The leaves on the ground were like a mosaic of gold and red. And it just seemed like a great, glorious cathedral. So that's what this painting is about. And that is Ravenbald. It's a beautiful experience. I was really bowled over. I was not expecting that. So every Georgia wonder has its own surprises. Our next place is on the Piedmont, Graves Mountain. This was one I had not heard of, and Charlie's going to talk a little about this. This is a worldwide attraction for rock collectors. And I'm telling you, people all over the world know about this site, and it's totally a surprise. So I'll let Charlie talk a little bit about this. We're choosing this as a kind of natural wonder that was kind of developed. A lot of the natural resources in our state, whether it's our forests or our mining sites, that were developed before we began conserving. It's back when everything seemed so abundant. How could we possibly run out of our natural resources or our animals, right? So I'll let Charlie talk a little bit about this very interesting site.
Well, may I ask, is anyone in here familiar with Graves Mountain? Except for Ken Thomas, he knows everything. But anyway, Graves Mountain is in Lincoln County. It's about 10 miles east of Washington, Georgia, which is in Mills County. But Graves Mountain was like 2 monadnocks, which is probably the best monadnock is Stone Mountain. But in the geology of this, the history of it, something like 500 billion years was created from volcanic islands in the primordial Atlantic Ocean. And so I guess that's how all the minerals got laid down there. But people, like Ann said, come from all over the world to dig here. I don't know if a lot of them still do, but at one point they did. And at first, Graves Mountain was known for a mineral called rutile, which is this beautiful, highly lustrous Some people even say more lustrous, some of the finer quality rutile is more lustrous even than diamonds. And Tiffany, I mean, it was first discovered, somebody wrote a paper in 1859 about all this rutile mineral. You could just walk around, even pick it up places on this. So you had people coming from as far as Germany and everywhere to look for rutile. Tiffany Company in New York eventually took over and started mining it and used the low-grade rutile to polish diamonds, and some of the other finer quality rutile sells for thousands of dollars. I mean, there's, I think, a couple of pieces in the Smithsonian, the Telescience Museum in Cartersville has a whole big display of the minerals from Graves Mountain. Anyway, later on, they discovered another lucrative lustrous mineral there called lazulite. And then another mineral that was discovered there later was called kyanite. Kyanite has a very high melting point. So it was used in spark plugs and other insulators and so forth. And also, kyanite was also became the plates for the space shuttle, to shield the space shuttles from high heat. And that went on and on. The mining, of course, these big mining companies came in and started mining kyanite on a very vigorous way, industrialized. Then they had a problem. Of course, pollution got into some dairy farms around there, and they were sued. Anyway, the mine was closed down. And so, but now they allow people, public, 2 times a year in April and October to go there and dig. You can dig all you want. You can, if you find a 10,000, some people have, if you find a $10,000 worth of minerals, you can keep them all. Anything you dig up, you can keep. So I included that as part of my 35 places because it's such a geological phenomenon. If you go onto the Georgia Mineral Society website, you can read all about it. And you can find it, and if you want to go there to dig in April or October, you can find out the specific dates. A lot of kids, I don't know how many, but I've been told several kids in Georgia, their families took them there, and it sparked their interest and careers in geology. And it's not the most beautiful place, but still, with all the colors there, it's still a fascinating place.
Thank you. One of the things I said in the book was it looks like a Star Wars landscape. The colors are quite vivid. There's lilac and orange and all of that. So when you go to visit this place, if you go like I did on one of the public dig days, it is a carnival community atmosphere. It is really quite something. People, you sign up on the website, you can see the announcement, and it says, rock, swap, and dig. No need to sign up, just show up. It says that in big bold letters on the website, and you go there and truly you join a big line of people outside the gate, and they're all waiting for Junior, who's the caretaker, to open up. I could hear Junior's on his way. We're waiting for Junior to open it up. And there's all these families and people with all their digging equipment and their backpacks, and people with wagons to haul their rocks. There was somebody brought a dog of questionable, I would say, pedigree, and he just looking very rakish, and he had a little sign around his neck that said, Rock Hound. So it is to me, it was like a country fair. You go in, and then it is a spectacular sight. You can climb up on these hills, and you look down into this mining site. Yes, it was devastated with industrial mining, but it is still quite beautiful, really something. There was a young man driving around a golf cart who stopped by us and he said, "Do y'all want to ride up to the top?" And we said, no, we're just going to walk. And I said, "Oh, do you work here?" And he was just proud as he can be. He said, "No, ma'am, everyone here is a volunteer. If it weren't for us volunteers, no one could come to this site." And he was it's just the nicest community spirit. So aside from the beauty of it, there is also just the community aspect, which is really quite nice. So this is a picture of the caretaker. He's on the right, Norman Jr., Clarence Norman Jr., and his family. They were all standing there. When you check in, there's tables. Everyone sells their stuff on these big tables. So when you walk into the mine, you're walking through this array of tables where everyone's selling their minerals, and trading. We'll trade or sell. Very fun. Anyway, so it's worth seeing.
Can you only go on those 2 dates? Can you visit other times?
Well, you can, if you call Junior.
Okay.
I think Junior's number is actually listed somewhere, but you can get special permission. But I don't know how easy it is, but those weekends, so 3-day weekends, and like I said, April, and another 3-day weekend in October. But yes, beg and plead, you have to get in there.
So the next site we wanted to talk about is Cumberland Island, which honestly covers probably every layer of human history. So I'll let Charlie wrote a whole book about it, and I'll let Charlie talk a little bit about the history aspects of Cumberland Island.
Well, I'm sure everybody in here is probably familiar with Cumberland, or probably been there or heard of it. Like Ann said, my second book was called Cumberland Island, Strong Women, Wild Horses. One time, I think I was being interviewed on a TV station, and the interviewer held up the book and says, Cumberland Island, Wild Women, Strong Horses. And I think I sold another 10 books. But anyway, Cumberland Island is probably one of my most favorite places in the whole world. And if you ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. You fall in love with it immediately because of its great beauty, its beautiful beach, its high white sand dunes, its maritime forests, the salt marsh stretching to the horizon, and everything just seems to come together on Cumberland Island to create this magnificent beauty. But what is the thing about Cumberland Island is, to me, amazing, is not only is it absolutely stunningly beautiful, but it also is just chock full of history. Of course, first there were the Native Americans, Timucuan Indians. Cumberland is supposed to be the dividing line between the Timucuan Indians and the Gwale Indians. And of course, they lived there for thousands of years. And then came the Jesuit Spanish priest who built 2 missions on Cumberland. I go to California and I like to visit the Spanish missions along the coast of California. I think there's 21 missions. Most of them are still standing, very historic sites. Well, Georgia and Florida had a string of Spanish missions itself, similar to, I guess, what you would find, because a lot of these, their sanctuaries were laid out according to plan, but you don't have any of the missions still standing in Georgia. Some of them have been excavated archaeologically. The one on St. Catherine's Island was excavated by Davis Thomas, who was with the Museum of History in New York. But anyway, there was the Timucuans, and next were and the Spanish Jesuits, and then the French started making inroads. Does anybody know what the French were looking for when they were exploring Georgia? They were looking for most of them were looking for one specific thing. Does anybody know? It was sassafras. Sassafras roots, because at that time, sassafras was made into what was believed to be a very potent medicine that could supposedly cure many ills. So you had the French, and then, of course, you had the English with Mr. Oglethorpe, who ran the Spanish out. And then, of course, the next one was what I call the Katie Green Miller era. Katie Green, if a lot of you probably might know, was the widow of Nathaniel Greene, who was the hero of the Revolution in the South. And, after the war, a grateful nation gave Nathaniel Greene a plantation outside of Savannah that was formerly owned by a loyalist. Does anybody know what the name of that plantation was? Mulberry Grove, and I don't know whether you know why Mulberry Grove is famous, but Mulberry Grove is where Eli Whitney invented the cotton. Katie Green Miller and her, well, keep saying Katie Green Miller because later, when Nathaniel Greene died, she married her overseer, who was a man named Phineas Miller, who was a Yale graduate. And the story was, of course, the plantation next to them asked Phineas Miller, could they set them up with a Yale graduate who could come and tutor their children. Well, they chose Eli Whitney. He comes down there, but he doesn't like teaching. So he ends up living on Mulberry Grove with Katie and Phineas Miller. And that's where he'd been in the cotton gin. Katie Green Miller says, Mr. Whitney, we have a great need for something in the South, for a machine to separate the seed from the lint, the cotton. Well, Eli Whitney, as you well know, got to work on it, and within a year had a working cotton gin. And another story was that he was up there demonstrating the cotton gin. The lint kept getting hung up in the blades or something, and Katie Green Miller says, well, Mr. Whitney, you're in need of a brush. And she walks down the hallway and gets her hairbrush, something, comes and put it in the bag, and that did the trick. And he says, Madam, you have perfected the cotton gin. Anyway, Katie Green Miller and her husband Phineas ended up moving onto Cumberland Island because Nathaniel Greene had owned a big bunch of timber over there. They were cutting timber in Georgia, the oak trees to build the tall ships for the early Navy. So anyway, they moved there, cleared the land, and started raising Sea Island cotton, which is one of the first places to raise Sea Island cotton. Well, anyway, story goes, Katie dies, her heirs, the land gets out of their family, and the next big landowners there, as most of you know, were Lucy and Tom Carnegie. Tom was the brother of Andrew Carnegie, and wealthy in his own right. And they built mansions over there, and just had a great life, as you can imagine. 300 servants at one time. And of course, as we all know, the land finally, with income taxes and depletion of fortunes, it started getting away from the Carnegie heirs. And they ended up selling most of the island to the National Park Service. And today, we have this beautiful, wonderful public national park unit called Cumberland Island National Seashore. We are just so lucky to have this place in Georgia.
I wanted to tell y'all, some of you, I don't think we shared, I had some little bookmarks, but The art from this book is going to be at the Booth Western Art Museum in Cartersville on solo exhibit in January and February. And if you have never been to that museum, it's probably my favorite art museum in the state of Georgia. It is a beautiful, beautiful museum with many beautiful landscapes, a lot of history. And Cartersville is such a great little town, some great lunch places. So anyway, if you get a chance to go to the exhibit, you might enjoy it. When you go to Cumberland Island, of course, the seashore, you never get to see seashores that are this wide and this unspoiled and no litter. And so this piece of art was really my impression of this aching whiteness of all that sand and the water and the light on it. And there was this line of pine trees, kind of like sentinels, kind of holding the line of the seashore. So that's what this painting is about. And this painting was the interior. It's Nightingale Trail, and the Spanish moss hangs down from the trees, and it almost creates this gauzy effect. When the sun comes through it, it's like a curtain, like a gauzy curtain. And then you have the bright green palmettos underneath, and that really is the effect. You feel like you're walking through this mist of the light and the moss, and then you have this green on the bottom. So that's what this painting was about. Cumberland Island has, I could have painted there. It was one of the first places I went to on the list. I could have painted there the rest of my life. It's so beautiful. So, all these places are like that. This is one of the ruins, Dungeness, which burned, I think, was it in the 50s? I don't know what decade it burned.
It burned in 59.
59, okay, yeah. The ruins themselves are still beautiful. So this is one of the illustrations from the book. And this last place is Macklemore Cove. And this is ridge and valley in the northwest corner. And this is a valley, very pristine, where there's, it's in between Lookout Mountain and Pigeon Mountain. And it's kind of been protected from development a little bit. There's no major interstates that run through it or cross it, so it kind of is a little isolated in time. So it's actually been preserved. In the book, we talk about our climb up the two separate mountains, trying to find the perfect vista of Macklemore Cove. It sounds, you get there, but when Charlie and I visited, we visited with the Preservation Society, and the woman who was the vice president of the Preservation Society joined it because they were trying to put a chicken farm right across from her book business, and she did not want that. So that's why she got involved with the Historical Society, and they were successful in preventing the big chicken factory farm, whatever. So we saw a lot of history with her, but she did not know about the views, so we had to go back and see views a different time. So I'll let Charlie talk a little bit about Macklemore Cove.
Of course, now it's not chicken farms anymore, it's data centers. Anyway, as Ann said, Macklemore Cove is in the northwest section of the state, just an absolutely beautiful place. It's between, as Ann says, Lookout Mountain. It's sort of like a V-shape between Lookout Mountain and Pigeon Mountain, and which are places beautiful in their own right. Pigeon Mountain is just full of, it has some of the deepest caves in the world. But anyway, like I said, the beauty of this is stunning in itself. But since this is a history audience here, I'll tell you one history story. And by the way, as Macklemore Cove is said to be one of the best preserved, if not the best, rural landscape preserved in Georgia. Something still resembling what you might see in the late 19th century or early 20th century about how these mountain coves looked, and the beautiful farms. Beautiful natural scenery, but and there's a lot of history there, a lot of Native American history, but one of the things is that I think it was 1863, in this V-shaped cove. Somehow the Union Army during the Civil War ended up camping in the cove. And there's one way in, it's a V, and you have to go out. Well, the Confederate Army found out about it and got up there and started surrounding the cove. And now you have all the Union Army camped down there, and the Confederates sort of anticipated just picking these people off. Don't want to sound cold, but that's the way it would have been in war. They were just looking at a very, very easy victory. Well, as things happen in war, I don't know all the details of it, take a while to talk about, but somehow the Confederate leaders made a mistake. The first mistake they made, just made the mistake and let the Union Army basically escape. So where did they end up? They ended up about 20 miles away at a place called Chickamauga. And as you know, Chickamauga, the battle, Chickamauga was the second bloodiest battle in Civil War. I think Gettysburg was the bloodiest. And, I tell people I could write a whole book on but if the Confederate Army had hemmed this Union Army in McLemore Cove, would the Battle of Chickamauga took place? And if Chickamauga had not taken place, how would that have changed the course of the Civil War? But like I said, that's if. And I could write a whole book on if. So anyway, but the history and the beauty of it are just worth driving around there and seeing it and reading about it.
Well, we are about to wrap up, and just to leave a little bit of time for questions. This is also one of the pieces of art from McLemore Cove. We got up on the hill by one of the historic farms, and there was a beautiful goldfinch with the thistles, and you could really see the whole valley rolling away with the blue mountains around it. It was quite beautiful. And this is one of the historic farms. The last thing I wanted to say about the art was that I expected to visit these places and sort of make some decisions about how to paint them. I'm in control, I'm the artist. But what I found was that each of these places, each of these places had its own voice, and each of these places told me how it wanted to be painted. I cannot stress that strongly enough. These places have their own voice and personality. For example, this was from the top of Brasstown Bald. This wanted to be a very peaceful painting with that peak away in the distance. A little bit how the Asian artists will paint with mists between a waterfall and a peak to show it's far away. This painting, this place wanted to be painted like that. Whereas this view of Providence Canyon, which is basically a series of gullies created by man-made erosion, was very violent, and I wanted to respond with this kind of red spatter of paint showing the clay, almost like the blood of the land, with the erosion, man-made erosion coming in. So that was the last thing I wanted to say about the art. This is Charlie's favorite place, Okefenokee. And this was a woman, a swamper, Sheila Willis. She was our guide in the Okefenokee, and her family went back in the swamp 200 years. She knew every corner. She is still alive. She's a writer. She knew every corner of that swamp, and she was our guide. It was an amazing experience. This was a monarch migrating through the swamp in November. You can see a little right through that tangle of yellow coreopsis that was blooming. And then it's just Chesser Prairie at the Okefenokee where all the golden coreopsis was blooming in November, and it was all reflected in the water. Wanted to leave a little time for questions. You might have some questions for Charlie or for me. Yes, the historian. Did I paint on site? I sketched on site. There were a few places that would have been a little challenging. Whitewater rafting down the Chattooga was not, my palette just wouldn't balance on the side of that raft. Yeah, so mostly it was recreated, some sketching on site, but mostly recreated in the studio later. Yes?
What's the medium you were painting?
The medium I used is watercolor, but I also supplemented it with ink for the line work and sometimes some colored pencil. So, and a lot of them are very small, and then I've done some large things for the museum.
Many of them will be in Carsville.
There will be almost 50. In the book, there are 80 paintings and 40 black and white drawings. They didn't have room for all of them in the gallery that is selected. Yes?
Are the paintings will have a permanent repository or?
A permanent repository? Not yet. They're actually traveling around the state. There's going to be an exhibit in Albany and also up in Blue Ridge. We're trying to make sure that everyone in the state can kind of get an idea of how glorious Georgia is, honestly.
How did you coordinate the history, the experience, the painting with Charles?
Oh, that's a good question. I wish that I had this book before I did this project. But I was painting, as I said, for a few years without any thought of writing the book. And so then when Charlie and I met and we agreed to write, and I write about what it's like to visit all these places for the first time. So there was some reconstruction and research that had to be done. I mean, I have a whole library of books on Georgia and Georgia history, but then Charlie, of course, was in charge of the really particular part with all the fact checking and all of that. So I'm like,
Don't blame that on me.
oh no. Yes.
So I have a question for Charlie. So 35 was all that you could fit in your 400 words for the AJC. What didn't quite make the
What didn't make
list?
the
And
cut?
what would?
You mean, who wouldn't make the cut in Augusta? Well, matter of fact, in my afterword here, I kind of sum up, what places that I'd like to include. And, everybody has their own list. And somebody says, well, why didn't you include this, include that? Others will say, well, that's just right.
He lists the
anyway,
almost.
I'll run through these. One is Toccoa Falls, which is just a stunning waterfall there. And Black Rock Mountain State Park, which is Georgia's highest state park. Vogel State Park, which you probably at the base of Blood Mountain, and Mount Yonah in White County. Just great vistas from atop Yonah Mountain. And Marshall Forest, I don't know whether you're familiar with that, but it's in Floyd County. It's sort of one of the few representatives of old growth forest. Of course, we have in our book here Cooper Creek Scenic Area in the Valley of the Giants, which is our choice for the old growth forest in the book. Hagee's Rock, I don't know whether you're familiar with that, it's near Augusta. It's probably the best example of North American, the flora of a North American rock outcrop. And most of the rock outcrops are centered in Georgia. So they're not all over the world. But I had Radium Springs, and why Radium Springs, near Albany, and why Radium Springs is because it's perennially on the list of Georgia's 7 natural wonders. But when I've been there several times in years past when it's at its peak. The old casino there, the beautiful architecturally rendered casino, it burned down. But Ann and I stopped there one time on our way back from, I think it was Longleaf Pines. And I was just very, very disappointed and saddened because it's been choked out by this aquatic weeds like hydrilla. And that beautiful blue water gushing up from the springs there, and it's just choked out now. So anyway, I included it but it's not. And then there's another place called Lewis Island, whether it's in the mouth of the Altamaha River on the coast, but it's just a great representative of bottomland hardwood swamp. Wassaw Island, are you familiar with Wassaw, one of the Georgia Barrier Islands? It's a national wildlife refuge, but it's got basically undisturbed forest cover, whereas most of these barrier islands were timbered and so forth. Boneyard Beach on Jekyll Island, so a lot of you are familiar with that. And Banks Lake, are you familiar with that? It's absolutely stunningly beautiful, Banks Lake. It's down in Lanier County near Lakeland, Georgia. And it's sort of representative of something called the Carolina Bay, which is a geological feature, mysterious in a way, but of course I didn't want to keep you on more than 3 hours. But,
He does include the list at the end of the 15 almost made it.
At the end, falls there.
Yeah.
Lula Falls is called Little Niagara. So those are some of the ones that we'd like to add.
Will
Well,
there be a next volume?
And
we'll confer. Well, yeah. Well, thank you so much, y'all. Thank you for coming and for listening.